from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
I am most pleased to welcome you to a 2-week series on what I would describe as a travelogue. Each year on this program we try to bring you some discussions and slides and help you enjoy somewhere in the world that you might not have been. Today and next week we're going to take you to Southeast Asia, to Indonesia, and we're going to call this trip over the 2 weeks Indonesia Odyssey. And I welcome 2 guests to the program that are very dear friends of mine and they're colleagues at North Idaho College. And I want to say in introducing our guests today that because of the trips they've taken and also some grants that one of them has written years ago on other subjects, that these 2 guests have been on this program more than anyone else in the 26 years that we've been producing this program, and we're delighted to have them back again. I welcome my colleagues, first of all, Judy Sildy, who is a professor of history at North Idaho College, and next to her is her spouse, Jill McLeod, who is a professor of English at North Idaho College. And Judy and Jim, as it has been in the past, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And I do want to say to our viewers, and on behalf of the panel and the staff, I thank you for always being generous to be with us on this program. And I also want to take time to thank you for the grants you've written. That really the first grant that gave us the opportunity to be broadcast in other parts of Idaho. And now today we're on 6 PBS stations and portions of 7 states and part of Canada. And we thank you for getting us off to a good start many years ago. And welcome today to discuss with us your latest trip to Indonesia. We're very appreciative.
It's our pleasure.
And I'm very pleased to welcome our regular panelists. First of all is Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho. And next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And as always, Janelle Burke will commence today's questioning.
Judy and Jim, welcome back to the program. We're going to talk about one of those exciting places that you've been. Judy, can you tell us, where is Indonesia? Would you set the stage for us geographically as to where in the world this wonderful spot is?
Okay, well, Indonesia is in Southeast Asia. It is an island nation. One thing that amuses me is that no 2 sources I consult seem to agree on how many islands there are, somewhere between 14,000 and 17,110, but scattered over a very large area. If you include the ocean part, as the government of Indonesia does, it's actually the 4th largest country in the world, but the land mass is about just over 3 times the state of Texas, scattered over a very large area. So it comprises large islands like Java and Sumatra and Borneo and Irian Jaya, which is part of New Guinea, and then many other smaller ones, including Bali and Lombok.
And Jim, what kind of atmosphere is there? And when I'm talking about atmosphere, I'm talking about both, is it warm? We think of it as being a nice island atmosphere, but is it warm? And then also something about what grows on the islands, or are they very diverse?
Well, to answer the first question, the climate there, actually I was convinced that I was going to be very uncomfortable the whole time I was there, because it's very humid in many parts of it, but in the parts that we were in, actually I found it to be quite enjoyable. And I've been to other areas like Hawaii, it's similar to that, and also to the Caribbean. And there are places in the Caribbean that are comparable as well, like Jamaica. And I found the atmosphere to be quite nice, especially if you had a pool in the afternoon so you could take a swim. As far as the islands themselves, in terms of their agriculture and so forth, they grow a lot of rice. Most every dish you eat is going to have rice in it, so if you don't like rice, it's not a good place to go. But fortunately, I do. I enjoy it very much. And of course, a lot of the fruits and so forth that you don't find in this part of the world very readily anyway. One in particular, I suppose many people wouldn't care to sample, is a fruit called durian, which is smells terrible, but it tastes supposedly delightful, and they love it there. And of course, I'm very partial to mangoes, so I can get all the mangoes I want, and I one of the things I like to drink at some of the restaurants there is something called mango latte, which is yogurt and mango juice mixed up together, and it's a wonderful drink. So they're very diverse, and they have much to offer, and I was quite surprised myself. I was all set in my mind not to like this area of the world, and I must say I was a complete convert after being there for only a short time.
Steve?
Well, since we're doing background questions, why don't we continue with that a little bit? Judy, maybe you could tell us a bit about the structure of the government in that country?
Okay, well, the Indonesian government is very, very interesting. It's a democratic country. They were the first Asian country to declare their independence from their former colonial masters. In other words, just I think it was 10 or 11 days after Hiroshima, they had been occupied by the Japanese for the last 3 years of World War II. They declared their independence from the Dutch. It then took 2 or 3 years of fighting to actually establish their independence fully. But since that time, they've been one of the world's largest democracies. And I would say they are quite democratic in some ways and really not very democratic in others. They were having their last round of major national elections while we were there last spring, and I think it's a fairly well-known fact that there are a lot of abuses of the electoral process. The ruling party, which is called Golkar, the party of Suharto, who has been in power since 1968, has just a tremendous monopoly on almost all positions of importance. They have kind of crazy rules which permit Golkar, for example, to actually appoint the heads of the opposition parties. And so the major opposition party in Indonesia has been run in recent years by a woman named Megawati Soekarno-Putri, who is the daughter of the first president of Indonesia, Sukarno. And when that party began getting too popular for the ruling party's preference, they simply removed her from office and replaced her with a person who is widely regarded as a sort of stooge, and so the voters bailed out on that party in great numbers. So there are definitely problems with Indonesian-style democracy, and yet I must also say, considering the pitiful condition that Indonesia was in when it first achieved independence, the Dutch had invested in things like railroads and roads, but had made virtually no human investment in educating people, in giving them job skills, etc. I think Indonesia has done an extraordinary job in overcoming poverty and other things like that. So it's obviously a complicated question, but very interesting country to study the political process and the related economic questions.
I'm sure Tony will probably want to follow up in that area, so I'll move to another one quickly, but again, it's somewhat related to this general question of establishing a background. So many islands. Is it a fairly monocultural nation, or are there various ethnic and religious groups represented there?
Oh, tremendous number of ethnic and religious groups. There are hundreds of different languages spoken. Every major religion in the world is practiced somewhere in Indonesia. Religious toleration is a major plank in their constitution. One of the reasons that we were so interested in going there ourselves and interested now in taking a tour group back there this summer is because I can think of few places in the world where you can see so much cultural diversity in one country. Amazing.
Jim, I'll follow up on that. Then in a moment we're going to get into the slides, but I always love for our viewers to be able to go with you through that visual. But Jim, give us a few more statistics about Indonesia. Both of you really articulating well about this country, but the population and some more things about the economy that I would call these demographics that would be helpful to the viewers.
Okay, well, Tony, I'm going to give you a few here that I think are interesting, that hopefully will address some of what you've asked here in doing this. But Indonesia is about 1% of the Earth's surface, which is pretty interesting. It has 2 distinct biogeographic areas, and what separates those areas, it's actually between Bali and the island of Bali and the island of Lombok, is what's called the Wallace Line. And everything to the west of the Wallace Line is Asian wildlife, flora and fauna, and everything to the East of it is, of course, related to Australia's wildlife, marsupials and so forth. So I don't want to say it's absolutely a situation of absolute separation, but they're predominantly in a separation of that sort. So you get lots of different animals and so forth in this region. Of course, the famous Komodo dragons are not too far from Lombok, and there's something a lot of people are interested in going to see, especially when they feed them the live goats and so forth. Indonesia has the Earth's oldest rainforest. Unfortunately, as you probably read in the news recently, that there have been horrendous fires there, and the damage to the lungs of many of the people in the region, including people in Malaysia, has been a very big problem, medical problem.
Not to mention the damage to the wildlife.
Not to mention the damage to the wildlife, which is a very bad thing too. I wanted to, in speaking of wildlife, let me just say that 16% of the world's amphibians and reptiles are located in Indonesia, 17% of the world's birds, 12% of the world's mammals, and 10% of the world's plants. So it's a very diverse environment, and it's one that, if you like tropical environments, I can't think of any place in the world I'd rather go than there.
Yeah, I'm sure it's been damaged by these forest fires, and that's very delicate balance. I want to turn to Judy and say that also to our viewers that you two are always so well organized, and we've broken the two programs on Indonesia Odyssey into two parts. On today's program, we want to look at Java, and next week when we come back, we'll look at two other sections that Jim just identified. I'd like to ask our staff at this time to bring up the slides, and Judy, I believe you're going to take us through what you saw in Java and explain. You always do such a good job of traveling through with those, and so I would ask the staff to do that at this time and tell us where you went and what you saw from these visuals that we have that we're putting up on the screen.
Indonesia is by far the biggest nation in Southeast Asia. Indeed, it is the fourth largest in the world, made up of over 14,000 islands, or as we said a few minutes ago, perhaps as many as 17,000. Many are legendary, but none more so than Java and Bali, which have been known to the West since at least Roman times. Indonesia's geography is dramatic. Java and Bali were once part of the Asian mainland, so the ocean strait which separates them is shallower than many North Idaho lakes. Then, just to the south of Java, ocean depths plummet to 23,000 feet. Imagine scuba diving there. Java and Bali are part of the famous Pacific Ring of Fire, where vast continental plates grind together and fuel scores of active volcanoes. The resulting landscape is majestic, and the lava-enriched soil incredibly fertile, but the volcanoes can turn deadly. Indonesia has more Muslims than any nation on earth, and the faith is a fascinating mixture of conventional Islam, colorful folk custom, Hinduism, and animism. All of the world's major religions flourish in Indonesia, where religious toleration is a cornerstone of the Constitution. For 400 years, this was the Dutch East Indies, the richest colonial prize of all. But Dutch rule was exploitive and did little to benefit the Indonesian people. After Japanese occupation during World War II weakened the Dutch grip, a bitter civil war led by Sukarno, who's in the front and center of this photo, finally gained Indonesia's independence. They were the first Asian nation to throw off colonial rule. Today, President Suharto, who's depicted here on this giant billboard, and his Golkar party dominate Indonesian politics, as we said a few minutes ago, in ways both positive and negative. We were there during the most recent elections, and it really was a very wild and interesting time. Jakarta, the nation's capital and Java's biggest city, is a sprawling metropolis of 10 million, with one of the world's hottest economies, or I should say, was hottest until just 2 or 3 months ago. The boom centered here has dramatically increased the Indonesian standard of living, yet despite desperate poverty remains a reality for millions. But despite its burgeoning cities, Java is still overwhelmingly rural. Much of its landscape looks like this: beautiful sculptured rice terraces called sawah, one of the world's oldest forms of agriculture. To me, they always look like works of art. For many visitors to Java, this is the most enduring memory: sunrise at Borobudur. 1,200 years ago, Buddhist kings of central Java erected a vast holy mountain of stone as a focus for pilgrims' journeys. Borobudur is the greatest Buddhist shrine in the world and the largest monument in the southern hemisphere. Borobudur must have taken a vast force of artisans decades to build. 3 miles of stone-carved reliefs, each conveying Buddhist insights into the nature of ultimate reality, rise in ascending tiers until you reach the highest terraces, on which scores of serene Buddha images gaze outward at infinity. From ancient times to the 10th century, wealthy Hindu kingdoms rose and fell in central Java. The beautiful 1,000-year-old temples at Prambanan reminded Jim and me of many we had admired during our 3-month sabbatical in India 2 years ago. They are as richly carved as any Gothic cathedral. Many panels like these depict scenes from the Ramayana, India's great epic and a perennial favorite of Javanese and Balinese even today. Those of us on our upcoming study tour will experience the Ramayana firsthand in many forms as we travel through Indonesia. Java is artistically rich, and the courts of central Java are the most famed and refined of all. Here, graceful court dancers arrive to enact a scene from the Ramayana at the palace at Yogyakarta. They dance to the accompaniment of the gamelan, Java's most distinctive music. Wayang kulit, traditional leather shadow puppet plays, are close to the heart of every Javanese. They explore everything from heroic tales and grand moral allegories to local politics and gossip. But as much as Jim and I relish Java's sublime monuments and vigorous arts, what we will carry away most is memories of the common people of Indonesia. Here in a nice role reversal, we see Jim with Anton and Bakpo, our trusty Bejak drivers in Jogja. If we have time, I'll tell you a little bit more about Anton in a few minutes.
Well, Judy, I want to say on behalf of our panel that those were really beautiful, beautiful shots. We thank you for being able to take our viewers with you on this trip. And we're running short on time. We got about 10 minutes left, but I'm not going to spend time up. But you brought and put on the table today some of the puppets and things, and I know our viewers are able to see that as we discuss this with you with our wide shots from time to time. We thank you for bringing that. It's just beautiful work in that country. But I'm going to return to Janelle Burke and let her continue our questioning.
I'm very much interested in the people of Indonesia. You mentioned them, and some of the pictures were delightful. Judy, can you tell us about Anton?
Okay, sure. Jim and I used Anton and Bakpo for 4 or 5 days as our Bejak drivers, our bicycle rickshaw drivers, and over that period of time we got fairly well acquainted with them. And being the curious person that I am, it wasn't too long before I began really peppering Anton with rather specific questions about the life of a Bejak driver in Jogja, and it was very, very interesting what he told me. On a typical day, he will make anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 rupiah, which at the exchange rate that was prevalent then would be a wage of about 80 cents to $1.25 per day. Since then, it would be much, much less because the rupiah has fallen dramatically. Of that 2,000 to 3,000 rupiah per day, he and his wife and 2-year-old son pay 1,000 rupiah per day in rent for the one-room home that they live in. He pays another 1,000 rupiah a day to rent the Bejak, which he does not own. It would take him years and years of work to put enough money away to buy that Bejak. And it doesn't take too much to figure out that that completely spends everything that he earns on many days, leaving nothing for food, clothing, medicine, or anything else. Even if he has a good day and makes perhaps 3,000 or 4,000 rupiah, you can see that for Anton and for many, many Indonesians, they're living very, very close to the bone. And the tremendous economic problems that have hit Indonesia just in the last 2 or 3 months since Jim and I were there, I think are going to hit very, very hard at people like Anton, and we're very concerned. On the other hand, Anton himself and almost everyone else we met were really delightful people, upbeat. Anton was optimistic about life. As he told me on many occasions, I pray my God will help me. I want a better life for my son. He's working very hard to do it. Anton dropped out of school in about the equivalent of 6th grade, and yet has taught himself 5 different languages. He speaks English, Japanese, Dutch, French, and German. Self-taught in order to try and get ahead in the world. And I think that he's pretty typical of many Indonesian people who we met.
Steve Sheen.
And this may be somewhat afield from what you came today to talk about, but can we discuss a little bit more about the economic problems that are a threat to Anton and other Indonesian people? What's the cause of those, and whether, in your view, that's something that will straighten itself out?
Well, let me say first of all that I'm not an economist, but it's sure something that as a historian I'm really interested in, and just caring about the people there as we do. I've been following fairly closely. Just the week after we left Indonesia, the economic problems which had started in Thailand and were slowly spreading through Asia really hit them. And in the 3 or 4 months since then, the Indonesian currency, the rupiah, has been devalued by over 1/3 of its value. Before that time, for the last several years, Indonesia had been one of the fastest growing economies on earth, about an 8% annual growth rate, was one of the proverbial tigers of Indonesia. It's hard to say what all has caused it, a number of things, but the general feeling is that there has been a widening gap between the rich and the poor, and that most of the capital that has been pouring into Indonesia, much of it as investment from Western countries, has gone into the pockets of the elite few. Indonesia, I must say, is a very corrupt country, has a tremendous problem with political cronyism, and so what has tended to happen is that a great deal of that money has gone to build rather grandiose projects. For instance, they have any number of huge high-rises which are hardly occupied at all, speculative business schemes, all too many of them run by members of Suharto's family or other political favorites, which Western economists say have a very minimal chance of really adding much to the economy. And so just 2 days ago, as we record this program now, the International Monetary Fund did the biggest bailout in world history, other than the one for Mexico 2 years ago, in an attempt to stabilize the Indonesian rupiah and to try and ward off some of the terrible consequences that this is going to have for working class people in Indonesia. And I am encouraged to see that they put certain stipulations on that package, although I understand they are not very popular with some Indonesians, but they essentially gave this loan only on condition that the Indonesians really rein in some of the more grandiose projects and instead get their economy on a sounder footing, and one which is going to benefit the average Indonesian more and put less in the pockets of the elite few. And in that sense, I think it's a good thing, but it must be a very scary time. I know that just in the last 2 or 3 days, I think 18 major Indonesian banks have gone bust as a result of this. So, wild time.
We're running very short on time, and I know the good news is you're coming back next week, and we're going to talk about Indonesia. We're going to Bali and Lombok at that time, but we'll talk again next week too. But I want to make sure that we don't lose a whole week with our viewers. You're going to take another trip, and what we've not told our viewers is that you take people with you. They can get credits, or they can have your expertise, and I think you've clearly demonstrated today the richness that people get on this trip. So in the time we have left, Jim, we'll start with you. Can you tell us where you're going next, and they can contact you, people who are interested here at North Idaho College?
Well, yes, Tony, that's right. Either Judy or myself here at the college, and we are going to Bali and Java again this year, and we hope to have a good-sized group. We have about 23 people that are associated with the college here, the faculty, students, and so on, that will be going with us.
What's
this
the date of this?
This will be in May.
May 26th
May
to June
26th.
12th is the main tour. Then we have an optional week in Lombok that leaves May 19th, but the main tour is
Can we give a telephone number, or I think you have email also, if you could give that to us.
208-769-3300.
I want you to do that again. It's 208.
208-769-3300.
We also have a web page, which I think we'll display on screen in a few minutes for anybody who wants to get more information via the internet.
And so they can contact you either way, and if all else fails, they can contact the North Idaho College Public Forum, and on this program we will get the message to you. And
sure.
I know there's deadlines, and there need to be some down payments.
Let me emphasize, we've got 23 people signed up right now. We are going to cap the tour at about 32, but we certainly welcome anyone in the viewing audience or in the community as a whole, as well as our campus community, to join us. We always have a nice mixture of people like that. So.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion. On behalf of our panel staff, I guess I do have a little more time than I thought I did. The clock is not matching what the crew is saying.
Let me just add something, Tony. I wanted to emphasize that we're low budget, high adventure. That's the sort of thing we do, and so I would like people to be aware of the fact that our tours are not going to be staying in the Hilton or something of that sort. And we like to get close to the people and their culture, and that's the sort of thing we really try to emphasize.
Nothing you don't do on your tours. You don't just go to hotels and stay there, or stay within the urban areas. You really get out and you get to know the people. And
no, as a matter of fact, I've written Anton a letter and told him to be prepared for us to come back with about 32 people, and he should go find the best bedjock drivers in Jogja to take us around. We think that's better than a tour bus. So.
Normally those bedjocks hold 2 people, but in my case it was not quite.
Jim and I felt that was sadistic to put 2 of us in one of those, these poor undernourished Indonesians.
You know, one of the most interesting things that I had happened to me is when we were out to Borobudur one morning, we were out there with a whole bunch of school kids, and at one point we sat down together in a log, and 2 young girls who were about 12 years old came over and sat next to me and put their arms around me to get a photo taken. And I wanted you to know that the people there are very friendly, and I think that you'd find them probably some of the friendliest in the world.
What Jim's not telling you is as soon as those 2 girls got up, 6 or 8 more came over, and when they finished, a larger crowd came, and we began to feel like department store Santa Clauses with just one person after another coming to have their photo taken.
Now, I do have a word from our staff that we're out of time, but I want to say to Judy Sildy and Jim McLeod, thank you for being here. It's been a wonderful show. And I want to tell our viewers you'll be back next week to go back to Indonesia to talk about Bali and Lombok. And we thank you for today. It's been most informative. We look forward to seeing you again next week in this continued travelogue. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've enjoyed the program as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you, and I'd invite you to be with us again next week at this same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station. From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
I am most pleased to welcome you back to the second week of our travelogue. And for you who were not with us last week, we went on a trip to Indonesia. We called it Indonesia Odyssey, and last week we looked at Java. This week we're going back to that beautiful part of the world and look at Bali and Lombok in Indonesia. In order to accomplish this goal that we have, we're very pleased to welcome back to our program 2 of my colleagues at North Idaho College and dear friends of mine. I first of all welcome to the program Judy Sildy, who is a professor of history at North Idaho College, and next to her is her spouse, Jim McLeod, who is a professor of English. And as I said to our viewers last week, we've been so fortunate to have you on this program on a number of occasions, and every time you take these very exciting trips around the world, you're generous to come here and be with us. And Also, we thank you again for the grants that you've written in the past for this program. And as I said last week, we're so pleased that over the 26 years we've done this program, we've had you as guests more than anyone because of the work that you've done, and we appreciate that very much. And again, thank you for the excitement of taking us on this trip. And as always, I'm very pleased to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and today Janelle will commence our questioning.
We're going to live vicariously through you today and take a trip with you. You've been many places in the world. Jim, can you tell us what was your first impression when you got to Bali?
Well, it's sort of a mixed impression. Actually, I was initially, I think, disappointed because the southern area where the airport is very well developed, and the traffic was, needless to say, horrendous. And I was driving, of course, and I was also driving a car. They drive on a different side of the road than we do, so I had to be mindful of the traffic and the driving situation. But later on, when we reached the central and northern parts of Bali, I was reminded a great deal of Hawaii and places of that sort. A very lush tropical area, lots of color. The people dressed in their traditional costumes in most places, and I found that just such an attractive thing that I was quite won over. But initially, I felt very apprehensive.
Very charming then.
Yes, very charming.
And Judy, what was your first impression of Bali?
Oh, the word green, I guess. It's an incredibly green place, a color of green. I think there's no other green in the world like young rice paddies, and that, of course, is what you see so much in Bali. Flowers everywhere, beautiful, happy, smiling people. I loved it.
And Lombok, Jim, what did you think when you got there?
Well, I hate to go back to the traffic situation immediately, but I did notice a distinct difference because, of course, Lombok isn't nearly as developed, and the traffic situation was quite a relief from what I'd had to deal with in Bali. But more than that, I think Lombok was, again, just the sense of it being very rural, undeveloped, was very attractive. Many long miles of beaches where no one, you couldn't see a soul. I am kind of a beachcomber, and I enjoyed roaming those beaches and finding all kinds of shells that were just beautiful. And in fact, I started a shell collection as a result of this trip there. And and the people there too were friendly. Of course, it's Islamic nation, and we found people generally in Islamic countries to be quite friendly in the past.
Well, it sounds wonderful. Judy, can you make some comparisons between Bali and Lombok?
Yeah, well, it's sort of a cliche to say that that Lombok is now as Bali was 30 or 40 years ago. It's much less developed. As Jim says, while Bali is Hindu, overwhelmingly Hindu, Lombok is Muslim. Bali is much richer than Lombok. Lombok has been almost entirely undeveloped until recent years. As a matter of fact, it hasn't been too many years since they suffered terrible famine and a great loss of life there. So Lombok is really in the midst of profound changes right now, whereas Bali, I think, has been experiencing those changes for some time.
Well, Judy, as we did last week, you've been so kind as to bring some of your slides with you. When you go on these trips, you have just hundreds and hundreds of slides, and you're kind enough to go through them and pick out some examples for our viewers. And at this time, we're going to ask the staff to bring the slides up on the screen, and you're going to take us to both Bali and Lombok in a visual way. Our viewers like that, so they get a taste of what it was like when you were there. And so I would ask the staff to, at this time, put the slides up. Here we go.
Okay. Bali is quite a small island compared to its neighbor Java, which we looked at last week. As a matter of fact, you can drive from one end of it to the other in just 2 or 3 hours. It may be hair-raising in parts of it, as Jim said, but it's small. Yet its beauties and cultural riches are extraordinarily diverse for such a small island. As in Java, the classic Balinese landscape combines lofty volcanoes and lush, terraced rice paddies everywhere. One of the island's commonest sights is farmers tilling the rice fields with oxen or water buffalo. It's very rare to see tractors or mechanization, and actually often you see whole villages turning out to share the labor of planting and harvesting. Another daily sight is the handsome, smiling people of Bali heading for a religious festival, dressed in their traditional finery. There are major temple celebrations all over the island every day of the year. Truly, we saw it every single day we were there. Wherever you look, women bear offerings on their heads. Someone has estimated that the average Balinese woman spends 1/3 of her waking hours making offerings, and I believe it based on our experience there. Bali has literally thousands of open-air temples with beautiful stone-carved gates, such as this one at Purataman Ayun. The Balinese are Hindus, as I said a few minutes ago, and ritual bathing in holy waters is as central to their faith as it is to the Hindus of India. So sacred pools like this ancient one at Tirtha Pool dot the landscape and are very scenic. The island abounds in fascinating ancient monuments. Certainly one of the most picturesque is Goa Gaja, where this rock-carved giant seems to be forcing apart the rock entrance to a shrine. Is he a monster or a guardian deity? No one seems to know for certain. The folklore of Bali also teems with monsters, layaks, and fabulous creatures of every sort, who are a mainstay of the performing arts. Here, at a torchlit dance performance in Ubud, is the terrifying widow witch, who even little kids know is really the demoness Rangda in disguise. And here is the barong, the amiable, shaggy beast, whose great clacking jaws keep Rangda at bay and guard the village. As you can imagine, the barong is a great favorite of all ages, and tourists, I should say, too. The arts are such a vital part of Balinese life that the Balinese language has no word for art. You can imagine that. No concept at all of it as a thing apart from everyday existence. Even very young dancers, such as these lagongs, are amazingly poised and graceful, and the gamelan music is unforgettable. Bali's most famous dance ritual is the kecak, in which 100 or more village men recreate a legendary army of chattering monkeys. I'll let you hear a little sound clip from it to give you some sense of it. The textile arts of Indonesia as a whole are amazingly rich, and Bali is no exception. Here, a Baliaga woman weaves geringsing, which is the most demanding of all techniques. It's a double ikat technique. The island of Lombok is Bali's neighbor to the east. As I just said a few minutes ago, the old saying is 30 minutes from Bali and 30 years behind, and I think that's probably a good slogan for it. The commonest form of transportation is still horse-drawn carts, and Jim and I really enjoyed the slow pace of life and the very, very friendly people there. The largest ethnic group on Lombok are the Sasak people, many of whom still live in traditional thatched villages like these. Like most Indonesians, they are Muslims, and just as on Java, the faith is a mixture of mainstream Islam and a lot of very curious pre-Islamic folk traditions. Off Lombok are 3 small islets called the Gillies. Many of our tour group will be heading here for a few days of quiet R&R before the active part of the study tour begins. It's a great place to grab a snorkel and explore the teeming coral reefs of underwater Indonesia. It was just a magical experience for us. Lombok and the Gillies are largely undeveloped, as I said a few minutes ago, but they're sure not going to stay that way for long. As a matter of fact, they're in the process of changing now. Beautiful beaches like this one are already targeted for 5-star luxury resorts. So go now if you want to see the real Lombok. And these laughing village kids bathing in a stream seem to have found the secret to happiness that so many of us here in the affluent West seek. I think perhaps that's the real reason for these beautiful islands' allure. Jim and I certainly enjoyed that.
Well, again, I want to say that I know our viewers well enough and let them contact us that was so powerful for you to show those slides, and I felt like I had been on the trip with you.
Well, you'll have to come on one.
Well, thank you. A snapshot of what it's all like. In fact, I'm going to take a footnote in this time, or have you do a footnote. You are going to be going back to Indonesia this summer, and we said that on the last program, but we have viewers that watch one week and not the other one. Would you take a moment to tell us what the date is of that particular trip? And we're airing this program in January, and they still have time, interested people, to sign up. And we're going to talk some more on the program about the one that you went on, but I'd like to just have a footnote of that now. Jim, would you like to start with that?
Yes, Tony. We'll be going back to Bali and Java and Lombok. Lombok will be a pre-week situation, and that'll be the 17th of May that we will be going there.
19th.
Sorry, 19th of May. Thank you. And
He wants to get a head start.
Yes, I'd like to go sooner if I could. And then, of course, following that pre-week, we'll go on to Java at that point, and then finish with Bali at the end of the trip. And it's all told, it's if I'm remembering this correctly, how many days? Help me with that.
The basic tour is 18 days, and then there's an optional week in Lombok.
So it's roughly 25.
The main tour dates are from the 26th of May through the 12th of June.
Judy, take another minute, and then I'll go back to Janelle on other questions. But when you take a group, and you've done this many times, in many parts of the world, and you both are well known for being tour guides and all, but it's really like a class. It is a class. It's a traveling class.
Yeah.
So give us a little insight of what happens. And I know you even have session cheer starting in February.
We do, indeed.
That before you go, and I mean, it really becomes an enriched process of how you do this. So share with our viewers what all you do.
Sure. To us, that's a very important part of it. We'll be meeting together here on campus for 8 different evenings during spring semester of this year, so that by the time we go, we not only have a good grounding in the background of what we're going to see, but the group already is very well acquainted and real good friends, and we have a lot of fun together for that reason. And then
background information.
Oh, tremendous amount of background information. We'll have some guest speakers here, and also it's what we call collaborative learning, where everybody takes responsibility for becoming an expert on one part of what we're going to see. And so it's not just Jim and me standing and doing a lot of lecturing by any means. And then, of course, when we get over there on site, we have local guides as well as what all of us contribute to it. So it's, as you say, it's a very rich learning experience. We just have a great time.
And you get out with the people
and you can earn academic credit if you want, although usually about half the people aren't so interested in the credit, just in the learning for its own sake. So
at the end of the program, we'll come back and talk about how to get in touch with you, but I want to go to some other issues on your last trip and return to Janelle Burke.
Judy, my first question in this round is for you, and it has to do with the status of women in Indonesia. We saw some of the pictures in the slides that you showed us, and you said that a lot of the women spend a great deal of time preparing their sacrifices. Can you tell us something about how women in Indonesia live, particularly how women in Bali and Lombok live?
Sure. I guess the first thing that I would say is it's very, very hard to generalize about something like this. This is something that I talk to my students a lot about in the classroom. The first thing that comes to mind is that I think there's a very widespread Western perception that Muslim women as a whole are very oppressed, that they have a very difficult time in life. And in fact, I really don't think that's true. Certainly we can find many instances in Indonesia, as we can in other parts of the world, of women who don't have equal rights. But interestingly enough, in some parts of Muslim Indonesia, the societies are actually matriarchal. It is the woman's name that goes down through the family line. The woman is the property owner, etc. That's not so much a part of the custom in Lombok, but it's certainly not like visiting some parts of the world where you find women really very sheltered. They're out very much in the working world. They're politically active, and certainly very much in evidence in Bali in particular because of the enormously rich religious life of the Balinese. You can't be in Bali more than an hour without observing how important religion is in a very relaxed, easygoing way, but it is such an important part of Balinese life, and I think the women are even more central to that than the men because they do spend so much of the time making the beautiful floral offerings, and everywhere you go, you see the processions of women with the lovely offerings on their heads, and it's very interesting, I think.
And Jim, I know that one of your interests has always been education. So you must have been interested in what kinds of educational systems they might have on those islands. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, I'm afraid, Janelle, that they're not exactly in our league in terms of the educational situation there. In the last program, we referred to Anton and the fact that he had dropped out of school at an early age and began to work, etc. And I think that's generally the situation there. Most of them get a grade school education. It's not to say that there isn't some efforts to ensure that more of the people are going to get opportunities, but at this point, I don't think they're very far along with that. A lot of the people there that are fortunate enough go to other places, to other countries to get their education. Some people from Indonesia have been schooled in our country, of course, and in Britain and in Europe in general. So some of the people do get high educations, but that's generally the people that have the wealthier classes, etc. And but you don't find the common people having much opportunity for higher education.
You know, if I could just piggyback onto that, though, I would agree with everything that Jim said, but I think it's important for us to remember that 50 years ago, when Indonesia came into existence, they had a 90% illiteracy rate. As I say, the Dutch had done very, very little to educate the Indonesians. As a matter of fact, I was reading just the other day that the total number of people in Indonesia who had a college education numbered 603 at the time of independence.
And it's a very large country.
It is indeed. It is the fourth largest. It has a
numbers.
Population of about 208 million. So China, India, the U.S., and next comes Indonesia, which really surprises a lot of people. I have many of my students who think of it as a very small, obscure country, and indeed it's not. So I think they have made great strides. Every year the literacy rate goes up, but unfortunately, I think as Jim said, the problem is that for many people they may attain literacy but not be able to stay in school much beyond that point. And many of them realize that the key to the future is education, but they also have to get out and make a living to support the family.
I want to move into some more issues on religion. Judy referred to that in her answer to the question, but I'll start with Jim. And you've both indicated that there is a real dominance of religion that's different. And like in Bali, it's Hindu, and in Lombok, it is Muslim. Jim, would you, and I know that you, in addition to teaching English, you've been very interested in international politics and religion and philosophy. So give us some more insights to how this affects these two parts of Indonesia in a very different way. What are some of the, if there are similarities or great differences in how it affects the life of the people in those two locations?
Well, I think by contrast with us, I'd say by and large these people are highly religious. Not that Americans aren't religious, but I think much more so than we are. I mean,
but higher percentage that.
Yes, right. And on a daily basis, they're involved in their religion, I think, that in the ways we're not. I mean, if you go to church once a week or something, that's fine for many people, but they actually, their religion permeates their life.
Both Hindu and Muslim.
Both
Definitely.
Hindu and Muslim. And, of course, the call to prayer when you're in Lombok occurs, I believe, is it 4 times a day? 5 times a day. Sorry.
Well, no, actually, if you're a good Muslim in most of the world, it's 5 times a day. But one thing interesting about Lombok, they have a large group that they call the 3-timers, who actually believe that it's only necessary to pray 3 times a day. So this is one of the many interesting little regional
These
variations.
are the modernists within the religion.
So Jim split the difference
So
between
I split the
3.
difference with them with that, but it's it's obviously they're involved in a much more greater degree than I think that many of the people in our country are in religious matters. But the Hindu situation is one too that's interesting, because every morning when we get up on Bali, we would find these little bamboo, almost like baskets, like little Easter baskets almost, full of all kinds of flowers and so forth that were set out on the walks and various places. And these were, of course, to offerings to keep the evil spirits away. And as Judy pointed out in the slides, the women spend much of their time making these little things, And of course, after they're used, they simply disintegrate, and it seems like such a loss to see these beautiful little baskets all disintegrate, and then the dogs come and eat them and so forth. And it seems like something you should have on your mantle or something, or on your table, and not allow that to happen. But they seem to that seems to be consistent with their idea that that beauty is temporal and doesn't last, and it also, as I said, has to do with their idea of keeping evil spirits away. And of course, they do believe in spirits. They're very particularly the people on Bali are very much concerned with the spirits and evil and good. Evil and good.
As it relates to the political process and government decisions affect religion, religion affects government, how does government deal with the difference? What is the difference between dealing with these two locations and the Hindu-Muslim approach to government and policy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One of the foremost principles that the modern nation of Indonesia was founded on is belief in God. In other words, I suppose you might say it's unconstitutional to be an atheist, but equally important is the toleration of any form of belief in God. And as I think I mentioned in the last program, every one of the world's major religions is sizably represented in some place in Indonesia. One of the things that's interesting is because it is largely a Muslim country, there is a small but vocal percentage of Indonesians who would like to see a much closer relationship between church and state, as we're seeing in more and more other predominantly Muslim countries. And one of the things that the Golkar party, the party which has in essence ruled Indonesia ever since independence, has really been quite adamant about is resisting pressure to make it a more Islamic regime. So you have the sort of contradiction that you've got certainly in most of the countries, an overwhelming number of Muslims, and yet very steadfastly opposing a marriage of church and state.
Protecting the minority religions to have equal
very
access.
Definitely. They're quite committed to that. Yeah.
One other question, and back to Janelle. In a broad question about human rights, Janelle has already asked about women's issues and women's rights. But if you take the whole spectrum of human rights and civil liberties, what is the status? Again, we've touched on that too with religious freedom that you just talked about, but can you elaborate more on, as you compare it with democracies such as ours? And we talked a little last week, but not in the same kind of context that I'm mentioning it now.
Well, I can just give you my impression, Tony. I didn't have any encounters that would suggest something more specific. But my impression is that the people really don't have a great many civil rights or human rights. I think the police are feared in some quarters, and certainly you don't want to get yourself involved in anything where you're going to be dealing with the police. And I didn't really read much or hear much about the prison system, but I suspect that it's not up to our standard by any means.
Well, Indonesia certainly has come under a lot of very unfavorable international scrutiny about their handling of the situation in East Timor. If you know that, there are various other separatist movements that the government has really been, I think, quite fierce in suppressing. It is dangerous to be an advocate of any sort of separatism in many parts of Indonesia. Certainly, Amnesty International could give you an earful on human rights abuses. There are also more routine things which are still very bothersome to people like Jim and me, whose whole profession is devoted to the marketplace of ideas. They routinely practice censorship. It's a cruel irony that some of the greatest literary figures in modern Indonesian history, their books are banned in Indonesia, so it's necessary to go out of the country to buy them. Books which I can't even see are terribly threatening to the Indonesian government. So there are tremendous problems, and yet because generally the economic situation has improved markedly for people in the last 40 or 50 years, although I think there is a growing frustration among the middle class in Indonesia about that, I don't think that it is widely perceived by the great masses of Indonesians as nearly a so critical problem as bread and butter issues, and I think therefore they're willing to put up with a certain amount of repression in the interests of maintaining equilibrium.
I just add one thing to that too, Tony, about East Timor. The situation there, of course, is a military situation, and what happened is that the former colony, Portuguese colony, was taken over by the Indonesian government. And what's interesting is to read the newspapers there and see that they refer to that as the time in which East Timor was invited into the Indonesian Confederation, as opposed to the way we, of course, see it as simply a seizure on the part of the government. And they are they're very angry with America on occasion with our criticism of that particular situation.
Time has just flown by. I thought I could go back to Janelle. We only have a minute left, and I do want our viewers to know again they can contact you here in January on your trip to Indonesia next summer in May and in June. Again, let's give it's on the screen, that's great. And here is how you can be contacted. Our telephone number is there, area code 208-769-3300. And the web page, Judy, you want to mention that briefly? And it tells about how they can also find out more through that. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. They sure can.
Well, we want to thank you on behalf of Janelle Berg and our staff for taking 2 weeks to be with us. You've been so kind and generous, and my friends, I thank you. I've enjoyed this trip to Indonesia for 2 weeks, and we'll have you back when you come back from your next trip.
We'll be glad to do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you enjoyed this program as much as we have, and it's such a pleasure to take you around the world with our guests, Judy Sildy and Jill McLeod. And I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.